Stop a second, I want to share something with you. For my husband's birthday this year, I decided to go through his stamps because he collected stamps for many, many years, and he had this trunk of stamps that was basically collecting dust. So I went through and thousands of stamps, and for hours I sat there. And it was fascinating because in a time of email, I remember going to the post office and getting letters and posting letters. Some of you don't remember that. Anyhow, so as I was going through, what struck me, especially for the Jamaican stamps, was that pre-1962, all I kept seeing were representations of Britain with Jamaica, with the Jamaican name. And I thought, this is kind of difficult to understand. And all I kept seeing was a king and queen, and shilling and halfpenny. I mean, you can't really see it, and it's a big catalogue. And I thought to myself as I was going through it, man, you know, imagine being governed by the same country that kept you enslaved basically for over, 300 years. And being governed by the monarchy and having your laws and your socialization being governed by the same set of people who kept you enslaved for so long. Strange, huh? And I thought to myself, because it really must get into the social fabric of the way you do things. Not only your laws, because Britain was very, very instrumental in the way that we would fashion our laws. As a matter of fact, our banks, you had to be British to work in them in some instances, and the managers would be expats. So imagine that before 1962. So even though Norman Manley fought hard for independence, and he's really considered the father of the nation because he believed that Jamaicans should be in control of their own destiny. We should have the authority to be independent-minded, independent-driven, understand what it meant to be Jamaican, and so we needed to be independent from Britain. For us to really understand who we were, we needed to be independent from Britain. And so he fought for that. Many people thought that, they didn't want it, in the same way that even people today think that, nothing's wrong with the monarchy. Some people think that. So imagine now, at that time, Jamaica was still sending bananas to Britain. So we had the markets there. Bauxite was on the rise, and Jamaica had great reserves in bauxite. So we were doing well economically. So even though Norman Manley did not win the general election in our independent to become the first prime minister in post-independent Jamaica, he's still regarded as a father of the nation. So once we got independence from Britain in 1962, we were doing well economically. You're coming out of the 50s, bauxite around the world, banana go out Britain, things are going for we, because you never really had globalization, so you still had those preferential trade agreements. You follow me? But what we didn't have, what Jamaicans didn't have, because remember now, you're coming out of a time when in the Victorian era, our laws were still, and who we were still very British, it was still a very society. So ordinary Jamaicans did not have dignity. They didn't have access. They, if you weren't a part of the wealthy families who were in Jamaica, you felt that it was hard because you had to fight for your place in society. And so your psyche also, having been indoctrinated by the British for so long around those kinds of policies and rules, you also believed in that your place in society was a certain place. So now, that couldn't work. Think about it. That could not work, because if we had continued along those lines, you would be experiencing some of the same fundamental problems that we see happening with our neighbors to the north. So what happened? 10 years after independence, coming in at a time now where the world is polarized. You have Russia, you have the United States, you have communism versus the West, and the world is polarized, right? In comes the magnetic, the electrifying, the brilliant, the spirited, charismatic, tall, debonair Michael Joshua Manley, coming from or looking like someone who you would think would sound the same way as perhaps an elite. That's not who he was. In comes Michael Manley to say, look, this established way of doing things has to be dismantled. For Jamaicans to really move forward and embrace their purpose, you have to give them access. That must have been very difficult for people, especially the established order, to hear, because in comes Manley and said, what you know? Child from Arnett Garden to go to the same school as a child from Cherry Gardens. The lady from Trelawney is to be able to own a home if she wants to, as a lady from Norbrook. So these were the things that Manley was now thinking about. And you know, some of us take it for granted, and because you're born, come see it. But there was a time when an ordinary Jamaican couldn't go to the bank and get a loan to buy a house. That's why Michael Manley formed the National Housing Trust. There was a time when it's only a certain set of people could go to high school, or some particular high schools in Jamaica. You had to look a particular way, or you had to have money. And Michael Manley said, no, here comes the common entrance. Everybody for go to high school because you are bright. That is how Jamaicans could even have access. All Jamaicans, he nationalized Barclays Bank, and it was a national commercial bank, because up until before, the managers came from Britain. You never had a black bank manager. It was during Michael Manley's time that you got the National Commercial Bank. I mean, women were sent home if they were pregnant, and they had to go have them baby. Michael Manley said, no, you can't have women going to go have a baby and not have maternity leave with pay. Worse, you can't have women doing the same work as men and getting less money, so you have to give them the equal pay too. So during that period, it was the most revolutionary social policies that we have seen in Jamaica to give ordinary Jamaicans access, real opportunities, to say, look, we have a stake in this. And it was the most revolutionary policies, I would have to say, since the abolition of slavery. Because it was the first time that the ordinary Jamaican man felt equal to the persons that they saw as having money, as having status, and he took away the stigma of being born out of wedlock. Remember, you know, if you were following, you never had any legal rights, basically, if you were born out of wedlock, and you were looked down on. So when you hear people say, well, no bastard, not there again, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, because those children were now not looked down on. So you need to understand what Michael Manley represented. I'm a child of the 70s. Andrew Michael Holness is a child of the 70s. And so a lot of Jamaicans who would not have normally had access had their dreams realized because of the policies of Michael Manley. They own a home, their children could go to high school, they could go to university, they got an education, right? They were given dignity, they could have walked in a certain place. But then what happened was, because the world was polarized, there was a real narrative that was created around Michael and other Caribbean leaders, because he was friends with Castro and people in also China, and he went into the world to make friends with Africa, and world superpowers got really jittery, and so they said, look, you need to just back off. And when Michael said to them, look, for me and my house, I will never walk through the world on my knees, I will walk through it on my feet. And so then all of a sudden you had this pull between the political forces of the conservatives and then the liberal Democrats and the progressives, because that it was what it was. When you give ordinary and the masses power, it frightens people. It really frightens people, and then they start to create these labels. So once those labels were created, that, you know, Jamaica is going communist. Jamaica wasn't going communist. Not because you're friends with Castro means you are going communist, right? But the policies that Michael was putting in were democratic socialist policies to give Jamaicans ownership and access so they could touch it, so they could touch their country, so that they could feel a sense of dignity and ownership and love and respect for their world. That's why the word was love. It was about embracing and unity. And so he has been stigmatized along those lines, and it is unfair and it is unjust to do that, because if you are telling the truth, you would also say that the world had one of the worst oil crises and they used to park the ships out in the harbor, right? Just to basically do a number of things to Manley, and then started to create these narratives around him. So when persons become or they relegate themselves to use Michael Manley's name to catapult a false narrative about Jamaicans having unrealized dreams, it really is fake news. Because I am here, many of us are here and educated and feel our Jamaicanness because of those social policies. And there were many. Jamaica's progressive women policies are a product of the People's National Party and Michael Manley and other leaders of the People's National Party. So if you're going to come at the dance, brother, you have, and if you're going to come at the dance too, before the Crown and Anchor Man set up, draw for the right dub plate. But you draw for the wrong dub plate and flop because you're wrong for touch Joshua. It's a wrong place to go. You just come quick. So, for what? Why? Because you want to just use a name and continue down a Trumpian line to suggest that somehow nothing was done. It's not true, and you know that. You know that. And so for those of you who really want to know the history about what was done, go and look it up. Go and look it up. Go and read it. Go and study it. Go and understand it. Ask the people who were around. Don't ask the people who were afraid of that established order. My parents stayed. My husband stayed. His parents stayed. Because they too recognized that for Jamaica to have its place in the world, all people needed access. And there were some fundamental things that were wrong because of how long we were colonized by the British. And I can tell you this, we are still trying to come out of that ideology because many of us are still stuck in that frame of mind. And we still have not recognized our belief system, our courage, our confidence. And we still believe that somebody else, if they say it, it's right. No, it's not. Perhaps it is time to let go of the monarchy. Perhaps it is time to have that conversation and cut that umbilical cord. That is what Michael Manley was trying to do. And so for me, I really want to thank him because a lot of my dreams and a lot of the respect that I got in the world as a young woman, especially in Africa, especially in Asia, especially in countries that were not westernized, were as a result of his legacy. And I traveled through the world very, very proud because my Jamaicanness is due largely in part to what he did. So I'm proud. I'm proud of the work of Michael Manley. I'm proud of the legacy that he left. And were he here today, I would say to him that, sir, as someone who is going through the political minefield of a different time, I look up to your courage and I look up to what you did because you were not a weak fence. And who we are as a People's National Party is a living testament to your work. So still rest in peace, and there are those of us here who are still in the struggle. All right, so yeah, later.